Hey, imagine this. At 75, Margaret thought her days of big surprises were over. But then a letter from her first love after 53 years showed up, proving that love can come back when you least expect it, and change everything about how you see life. Loss and getting a second shot at happiness. Margaret stood at her kitchen window, watching the morning sun paint golden streaks across her garden. At 75, she had learned that some truths only show themselves with time. Like flowers that bloom only in autumn, today would bring one such truth, one that would challenge everything she thought she knew about love, loss, and second chances. The letter had arrived 3 days ago, but she hadn't found the courage to open it. It sat on her kitchen table, the return address in handwriting she recognized despite the trembling script. Thomas Mitchell. After 53 years of silence, he had found her. Margaret's fingers traced the envelope's edge as memories flooded back. She was 22 again, standing in that same garden when it belonged to her parents, watching Thomas walk away down the dusty road. The war had ended, but their love had become its casualty. Her parents had forbidden their relationship. He was from the wrong side of town. They said she had chosen duty over her heart, a decision that had haunted every day since. The phone rang, startling her from her reverie. Her daughter Sarah's voice filled the kitchen. "Mom, I'm worried about you living alone in that big house. Have you considered the retirement community I mentioned?" Margaret smiled. Sadly, her children meant well, but they saw her as fragile, as someone whose story was nearly finished. They couldn't imagine that at 75, her heart still yearned, still hoped, still believed in possibilities. "I'm fine, dear. This house has many more stories to tell." After ending the call, Margaret finally opened the letter. Thomas's words were simple but profound. "Margaret, I know it's been a lifetime, but I never stopped thinking about you. I'm in town for 2 weeks, staying at the Riverside Inn. If you'll have me, I'd like to see you again. There are things I need to say." The truth about being 75, Margaret realized, was that society expected you to be done with passion, done with adventure, done with the messines of love. But her heart hammered against her ribs like a bird desperate. Flight age hadn't dimmed her capacity to feel. It had only made those feelings more precious, more urgent. She spent the morning preparing, choosing a blue dress that brought out her eyes. Still the same cornflower blue that Thomas had once said reminded him of summer skies. In the mirror, she saw wrinkles and silver hair, but also the young woman who had danced under stars and dreamed of forever. The Riverside Inn hadn't changed much in 5 decades. Margaret's hands shook as she approached the lobby, wondering if she would recognize him, if he would recognize her. Then she saw him, taller than she remembered, his dark hair now white as snow, but his eyes were exactly the same warm brown that had once looked at her like she was his entire world. "Margaret." Her name on his lips was a prayer, a question, a confession all at once. They sat in the inn's garden, words flowing like water after a drought. Thomas told her about his life, his marriage to a kind woman who had died 10 years ago, his children scattered across the country, his career as a doctor that had taken him far from their small town. "I loved Elizabeth," he said, his voice heavy with honesty. "But Margaret, you were my first love, my deepest love. Not a day passed that I didn't wonder about the life we might have had." Margaret felt tears threatening. She had married Robert 2 years after Thomas left, had raised 3 children, built a good life. But there had always been a corner of her heart that belonged to Thomas alone. "I used to dream about you," she admitted. "Even after all these years, especially on quiet evenings, I would wonder if you were happy, if you remembered dancing with me at the county fair." Thomas reached for her hand, his fingers gnarled with arthritis, but still gentle. "I remember everything: the way you laughed, the way you hummed while reading, the way you believed in people even when they disappointed you. The truth about Being 75 was that love didn't follow the timeline society prescribed. It didn't care about wrinkles or grey hair or the years that had passed. It simply was as eternal and surprising as a sunrise. Over the following days, they rediscovered each. Other Thomas had rented a car, and they drove through the countryside, visiting places that held their shared memories. The old oak tree where he had carved their initials was still there, weathered but standing. The creek where they had picnicked had grown narrower, but it still sang the same gentle song. They talked about their lives, their losses, their regrets. Margaret learned that Thomas had never forgotten her favourite poem, could still recite it from memory. Thomas discovered that Margaret had kept a pressed flower from their last dance, tucked between the pages of her Bible. "Do you think we're foolish?" Margaret asked one afternoon as they sat by the creek. Two old people acting like teenagers. Thomas turned to her, his expression serious. "Margaret, I've learned that foolishness is wasting the time we have on Earth pretending we don't feel what we feel. I've spent 53 years being practical, being reasonable. I don't want to spend my remaining years the same way." The truth about being 75 was that time became both enemy and friend. There was so little of it left, which made every moment precious beyond measure. But there was also freedom in that. Scarcity, freedom from the expectations and judgments that had governed their younger selves. Margaret's children were shocked when she told them about Thomas. Sarah drove down immediately, prepared to stage an intervention. "Mum, you barely know this man anymore. What if he's after your money? What if he breaks your heart?" Margaret looked at her daughter, successful, practical, afraid of risk, and felt a deep sadness. "Darling, my heart has been broken for 53 years. Thomas isn't here to break it. He's here to heal it." The truth about being 75 was that your children, no matter how much they loved you, saw you as their responsibility rather than as a person with desires and dreams that extended beyond grandmotherly duties. Thomas extended his stay at the inn. They fell into a rhythm. Morning coffee in Margaret's garden, afternoon drives, evenings talking on her porch swing. He helped her with small repairs around the house, and she cooked his favourite meals, amazed that she still remembered them. One evening, as they watched the sunset paint the sky in shades of rose and gold, Thomas took her hand. "Margaret, I know this might sound crazy, but I want to ask you something." Her heart fluttered, even at 75. The possibility of love could make her feel like a girl again. "I want us to travel together, see the world we never got to see. I have enough money saved, and you have your nest egg. We could go to Paris, to Rome, to all the places we used to dream about." Margaret's breath caught the practical part of her mind, immediately began listing obstacles. Her health, the expense, what people would think, but the woman who had once danced barefoot in the rain whispered, "Yes." What about propriety? She asked, though she was already imagining cobblestone streets and European cafes. Thomas smiled, the same mischievous grin that had captured her heart decades ago. "At our age, propriety is overrated. Besides, I have another proposal." He slid off the porch swing and, with considerable effort, got down on one knee. Margaret's hands flew to her mouth. "Margaret Rose Patterson, I should have asked you this 53 years ago. I should have fought for you. Should have been braver. I can't change the past, but I can choose how I spend whatever time I have left. Will you marry me?" The truth about being 75 was that love could be both familiar and fresh, both a homecoming and an adventure. They knew each other deeply, yet they were also discovering who they had become through the years of separation. Margaret looked into Thomas's eyes and saw their whole story. The young love that had bloomed and been cut short, the decades of wondering and longing, and now this miraculous second chance. Society might call them foolish, their children might worry, that she had learned that at 75, you stopped living for other people's expectations and started living for your own truth. Yes, she whispered, then louder. Yes, Thomas, yes to marriage, yes to travel, yes to whatever time we have left. He slipped a simple gold band onto her finger, not the elaborate ring he might have bought in their youth, but something honest and real, like their love. The wedding was small, held in Margaret's garden under the roses that had been her constant companions through decades of solitude. Her children attended, still bewildered but beginning to understand that their mother was not the fragile widow they had imagined, but a woman reclaiming her life. Thomas moved out of the inn and into Margaret's house. They turned the spare bedroom into an office where they planned their travels, spreading maps across the desk like young adventurers. Margaret sold some of her late husband's stocks, and Thomas liquidated his savings. Their children worried about their finances. But Margaret and Thomas knew something their children didn't understand yet. That money saved for a someday that might never come was worthless compared to experiences shared with someone you loved. They honeymooned in Italy, walking hand in hand through the streets of Rome, marveling at the Sistine Chapel, sharing gelato like teenagers. Margaret had worried about traveling at their age. But Thomas was right. The urgency of time made every moment more vivid, more meaningful. In a cafe overlooking the Mediterranean, Thomas raised his glass of wine to her. To second chances, he said. To first chances, Margaret corrected. We're not the same people we were 53 years ago. This is something entirely new. The truth about being 75 was that love could be both familiar and fresh. Both homecoming and adventure, they knew each other deeply. Yet they were also discovering who they had become through the years of separation. They returned home changed, carrying stories and photographs, plans for their next journey. Margaret's garden bloomed more vibrantly than it had in years, as if it too had been renewed by love. Thomas built birdhouses for her yard, and they spent mornings identifying the species that came to visit. One afternoon, as they sat reading together on the porch, Margaret's neighbour stopped by. Mrs. Henderson was 82 and had been widowed for 15 years. I have to admit, she said, when I first heard about you and Thomas, I thought you were both crazy. But seeing you now, you both look 20 years younger. Maybe there's hope for old hearts after all. Margaret smiled, remembering her own skepticism just months before. The heart doesn't age, she said. It just gets buried sometimes under expectations and fear. But it's always there, waiting. As autumn arrived, Thomas developed a persistent cough. The doctor's diagnosis was gentle but clear. Lung cancer. Advanced, maybe 6 months. The disease he had spent his career fighting had found him. Margaret felt the familiar weight of impending loss, but this time it was different. This time she had chosen love fully, completely, without reservation. There would be no regrets, no wondering about what might have been. They decided not to tell the children immediately. Instead, they booked a trip to Scotland, where Thomas's grandparents had immigrated from. They walked the highlands, visited ancient castles, traced his family history. Margaret documented everything, knowing that these memories would have to sustain her through whatever came next. The truth about being 75 was that you understood the preciousness of time in a way that young people couldn't. Every sunset was a gift, every shared laugh a treasure, every moment of ordinary contentment a miracle. Thomas grew weaker, but his spirit remained strong. On their last night in Scotland, he took Margaret's hand as they sat by the fireplace in their bed and breakfast. I want you to know, he said, that these months with you have been the happiest of my life. Not just because of what we've shared, but because you taught me it's never too late to be brave. Margaret leaned against his shoulder, breathing in his familiar scent. You taught me that too, she whispered. They returned home as winter settled over the countryside. Thomas's condition got worse quickly, but he faced it with the same quiet courage he had brought to everything else. Margaret cared for him as fiercely as she had loved him, refusing offers of help from hospice nurses. "I can do this," she told her worried children. "I want to do this." The truth about being 75 was that you had strength you didn't know you possessed, drawn from a lifetime of facing difficulties and surviving them. On a quiet February morning, as snow fell softly outside their bedroom window, Thomas took his last breath with Margaret holding his hand. She felt his spirit leave, felt the profound silence that follows a life well lived. At the funeral, people spoke of Thomas's accomplishments as a doctor, his service to the community, his devotion to his first family. But Margaret knew a different truth, that sometimes the most important thing a person can do is love fully, even when it comes late, even when the time is short. After the service, Margaret's daughter Sarah approached her. "Mum, I owe you an apology. I thought you were being reckless, foolish, but seeing you these past months, I've never seen you happier. Even now, with your grief, there's a peace in you that wasn't there before." Margaret nodded, understanding that her daughter was beginning to learn one of life's hardest lessons, that safety and happiness were not the same thing. Spring came early that year, and Margaret's garden exploded with color. She tended it carefully, remembering Thomas's hands working beside hers. The birdhouses he had built attracted families of wrens and cardinals, filling the air with song. Margaret received letters from Thomas's children, thanking her for bringing joy to their father's final months. She corresponded with Mrs. Henderson, who had found the courage to call an old friend, a widower she had known in high school. One evening, as Margaret sat on her porch swing with a cup of tea, she reflected on the past year, the truth about being 75. She realized was not what she had thought. It wasn't about endings or accepting limitations or gracefully fading into the background. The truth about being 75 was that life could still surprise you, still offer gifts you never expected. It was about having the courage to remain open to love, to adventure, to the possibility that your best days might still be ahead of you. Margaret opened the journal she had started keeping and wrote, "Today, I learned that time is not the enemy of love, it is love's truest friend. Every moment becomes sacred when you know how precious and fleeting it is." Thomas and I had 8 months together, but they were fuller and richer than many people's entire lifetimes. As stars appeared in the darkening sky, Margaret made a decision. She would continue traveling, would see the places she and Thomas had planned to visit together. She would carry his love with her, that she would also remain open to whatever other gifts life might offer. The truth about being 75 was that you were not done, not finished, not ready to fade quietly into memory. You were still capable of growth, of change, of love that could transform not just your own life, but the lives of everyone around you. Margaret smiled, feeling Thomas's presence in the evening breeze, and began planning her next adventure at 75. She was finally learning how to truly live.